Good morning, everyone. We have another great show for you all today. Andrew Feldman and Amanda Mackey join us for Team Rising. You also have friends of the show, Matt Taibbi and David Dayan.
And also, I forgot my glasses, so you're all going to have to bear with me today. First, we wanted, though, to start with the big news from yesterday. Bill Cosby was released from prison. Yesterday, a Pennsylvania appeals court overturned his sexual assault conviction. In a 4-3 ruling, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said the prosecutor was bound by his predecessor's agreement not to charge Cosby. The attorney for Cosby's accusers, Lisa Bloom, had this to say about the decision.
Well, I'm glad he got some time served. I really am. But if you think, I believe it's more than 60 or 70 women in total have accused him. He got to have a good long life of wealth and privilege before he was held accountable for his crimes. So it was only a very tiny, tiny measure of the justice that he should have received.
E. Jean Carroll also chimed in, saying, "This is why women do not come forward." What do you think about what happened yesterday, Ryan?
I mean, there are a bunch of different layers to this.
Right.
So we could start with the question of whether or not the legal merits of the case are legitimate here. And so the Supreme Court threw the case out, saying that Cosby felt like he had immunity because the previous prosecutor had declined to prosecute him after there was outrage at his entire crime spree throughout his life. Mm-hmm. The new prosecutor then brought charges that the previous one had not done, and relied significantly on Cosby's own testimony in depositions for a civil suit.
In which he had incriminated himself. However, according to what I've read, there doesn't appear to be anything in writing that says you're off scot-free. Right.
You know, go enjoy the rest of your crime spree ridden life. And so when the Supreme Court says that this is a question of fairness and decency, I suppose in some gentleman's agreement world where people are living by their word, and there's honor among all of these different people, then okay, you could maybe see some argument for it. That is not remotely how our criminal justice system works. Any defendant who tries to go to a court and say, but the officer or the prosecutor said X before I incriminated myself, is not going to get anywhere with that. So the fact that he couldn't prove on paper that he had this agreement, I think to me really undermines that basic legal case. And then more broadly, you have the other question of justice. You know, if it's true that he has 40 to 70 victims out there, then obviously justice wasn't done.
I mean, he's guilty as hell. I mean, there's no question about it. He's guilty, and it's a problem with the system right now that we know that he's guilty and he's out of jail. That's obviously, there's just no way around it. It's a problem with the system, but the system may have gone wrong with the prosecutor, and that's the sort of sad thing is I think to some extent this is a statement on what happens in really high-profile cases when people are under pressure to get that verdict that they need because they know the public needs it, and they make decisions that probably don't serve anyone for the best. I'm curious to see, to your point, if there's nothing in writing, I'm curious to see how that plays out. I think that's interesting to watch going forward. But Cosby does have some defenders. I mean, one of his co-stars, Felicia Rashad, weighed in on the matter. You can see it right there. Finally, a terrible wrong is being righted. A miscarriage of justice is corrected. Cosby also released a statement saying, "I've never changed my stance or story and maintained my innocence." Cosby thanked his friend and supporter and, of course, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court.
And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the Derek Chauvin case, where people were saying, well, the system worked. But if, in order for the system to deliver the result that you want, there has to be worldwide pressure on the system to deliver it. Does that mean the system actually worked? And here we're finding out, well, I guess actually it doesn't mean that. So the system for Cosby's victims worked in the sense that he was convicted, he was sentenced to prison, he did go to prison, but then once the global pressure was off, the old system kicked back in and allowed somebody with wealth and power to make an argument that criminal justice reform advocates might actually agree with in principle.
Right.
So, you know,
Yep.
if we're going to do this across the entire criminal justice system, then good, make this a standard. But that's not what's going on here. Somebody with a lot of wealth and power and a great legal team, once the global pressure was off, was able to make an argument that wouldn't be available and isn't available to the millions of other people who are in prison.
I think that's a really good way to say it, because the case that this was a wrongful conviction that would apply, especially in other cases, is a really important point, because I think there's a very strong case that that's what happened, but he wasn't even able, I mean, he spent time in jail. He spent a lot of time in prison, and even it took him that long to sort of point that out on a legal level. So imagine people who actually are wrongfully convicted and aren't actually guilty of the other things that were brought about in the trial and actually had unfair trials and don't have the resources of Bill Cosby. Yeah, it's another universe, but that's why I do think it is good that when you have the eyes of the world on a case like this, we are able to say the system should be better, that there should be fair prosecutions, and that people shouldn't be tricked into doing something under unfair pretenses. In this case, it's odious because it is a serial offender. It is somebody who is, again, guilty as hell and of horrific treatment of women over and over again as a pattern over the course of his lifetime, an incredible abuse of power, an incredible abuse of his privilege, an incredible abuse of women, just period. And here he is. He's free. He woke up this morning a free man.
Right, and there are a lot of shoulds in there, and people just don't have a lot of faith that the shoulds are going to actually apply to defendants across the board. And if they did, okay, that's a different question. But if we want to move in a decarceral direction, where you're not doling out long sentences for petty crimes, then you can get to a situation where you're like, okay, maybe 3 years time served for a person in their mid-80s is what society demands here, but not when Gwen Ivey, who we talked about just the other day on the show, the 76-year-old woman who just went back to prison for not answering a phone call from her PO during a computer class, when she's sentenced to more than 30 years for selling heroin and is sent back to prison for this computer class. To hear any judge talk about the requirements of fairness and decency in our criminal justice system is obscene. It
is, and then at the same time, though, you have it's a good thing to see.
Let Gwen out too.
Right, and that's to your point about the shoulds. It is a good thing to say there are standards of fairness in our legal system, and here they were breached. And therefore, we are going to do a difficult thing, but the right thing. But it does highlight the contrast between the legal process and actually securing an outcome.
Right.
So the outcome versus the process in this case, that's a really bad contrast, that the process was not able or was rushed or was under so much pressure. The Chauvin parallel, I think, is a good one in that you have the eyes of the world on people. You have on this case, you have prosecutors just aggressively pursuing one thing. Maybe that's why justice was rendered in the Chauvin trial. Maybe that's why justice was rendered in this trial, even if it was very difficult, because Bill Cosby is a very powerful man, as you said, with a very powerful legal team. But the contrast there, when you think about what went wrong in the process of conviction versus that outcome, it is obscene. It is obscene.
And we'll see where Chauvin is in a few years. But White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about the ruling. Here's her response.
I don't have a direct response from the White House to that announcement. I will say, which you touched on, and I'll just use the opportunity to reiterate, that the president has long been an advocate for fighting against violence against women, for ensuring that we are raising the voices and the stories of people who have been survivors of sexual assault. That's something he has done throughout his career and will continue to do. But I don't have a specific comment on that announcement today. If we do have one after the briefing, I'll make that available to all of you.
And Tara Reid quickly came out with a comment saying, "I'm not so sure that this is that you can universally apply this label to your record, given the allegations that I've made." What do you think the politics of this are? Do you think that there will be any politicians who say, you know what, there was a miscarriage of justice the way that the system railroaded Bill Cosby? Or do you think that across the board there's going to be condemnation here?
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to touch this. I mean, if we think back a few years, this was really the first high-profile MeToo conviction, and I think people are terrified to touch this with like a 10-foot pole unless they're saying something sort of along the lines of what Psaki just said, where it's like, we'll let you know if we do have a statement. Obviously, we are concerned about violence and abuses of women, so I don't think it's going to turn into a big political battle. That's probably a good thing at this point, but people are like floating the question right now, does Bill Cosby, Jonathan Turley floated the question, does Bill Cosby have a case to sue the state for wrongful incarceration? And if that happens, and if Bill Cosby takes steps to continue this legal battle, which I have no idea if he's interested in doing, then this could get very political, it could get very ugly, and it could get very damning for the legal system in Pennsylvania and for prosecutors.
Although Harvey Weinstein's still in prison, but yeah, that would be quite a remarkable turn of events if he tried to do that. I can't imagine that he would, because he knows he's guilty. Mm-hmm. The reason we know that he knows he's guilty is that he was convicted based on his own deposition.
He said it.
So, this is not even like an O.J. Simpson case where he wrote a memoir that they insisted he change the title to "If I Did It."
Yeah.
Cosby has actually said, I did it. So at that point, suing for a wrongful conviction, because you're claiming the process was wrong, even though you actually were guilty, just does him no favors. And I don't think he needs the money.
Here's another point, though. If you think about Phylicia Rashad's statement in support of Bill Cosby is somebody who obviously was this beloved icon of American pop culture for years and years and years. I mean, beloved by everyone. And I think there is probably a section of the public that wonders if he was unfairly sort of put in prison. And if they follow the case really closely, then they would have seen probably what Phylicia Rashad saw and said that, there was an issue with the prosecution agreement and the incrimination and the use of that in the second trial. And then to that extent, I guess it's good. This is why the system has to sort of be run with some semblance of justice. It's why we have to have standards that are upheld. Unfortunately, even in cases where, like this one, we know somebody is completely guilty because it at least, you can trust the standards at the end of the day. But like you say, can we just trust the standards in high-profile cases?
Right, that's the standard. Right. If you have money and you have power, then and the global pressure is off of you, then these are the standards that apply to you.
Yeah.
If you have money and power and the entire world is demanding that you get sent away, then you're going to go away for a couple years. That seems to be the standard.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. And that's why I thought your parallel with the Chauvin case, your point there is really interesting because it's like we know how this works outside, right? Like we know in these high profile cases when there is pressure, things happen in different ways and they try really hard to get things to go the direction that they think is best for public opinion, that they think is best for the optics and for the representation sort of on the public stage. And we know that that's not always carried out down the board.
No, it's not. It certainly isn't. Up next, we'll tell you what's on our radars.